All right, I think we're gonna get started. Welcome everyone to HCP's online webinar for this month, titled I Find Your Lack of Compliance Disturbing, Compliance Lessons Learned from Star Wars. We're super excited to do this webinar today on May the 4th for all those who celebrate. And we have the privilege of hearing from Jake Yates, and I have the privilege of reading his bio real quick and introducing him. Jake Yates is a seasoned healthcare professional with over 15 years of experience in mental health risk adjustment, healthcare audits, and compliance. As a compliance consultant, he partners with healthcare organizations to navigate the complex landscape of regulatory requirements and ensure compliance. Jake's expertise spans a wide range of compliance areas, including CMS audits, RAPs and EDS claim submissions, healthcare risk management, and regulatory healthcare compliance. His extensive experience working with the top U.S. health insurance plans has equipped him with a deep understanding of healthcare compliance and Medicare Advantage, HEDIS, and RADV audits. Jake has a proven track record of delivering engaging and informative presentations on healthcare compliance, leadership, and a variety of other topics. He has shared his insights with a diverse audience, including nationwide healthcare organizations, professional billing groups, medical groups, and private physician practices. By leveraging his deep industry knowledge and strong communication skills, he empowers healthcare organizations to achieve compliance excellence and drive positive change within each institution. Jake holds a bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Utah and a master's of business administration and healthcare management degree from Western Governors University. His professional certifications include Certified in Healthcare Compliance from Healthcare Compliance Association and Certified Artificial Intelligence Professional in Healthcare Compliance from Comply AIQ. And we are so excited to hear from you, Jake. So with that, I will turn the time over to you.
Hey, perfect. Thanks, Josie, and welcome everyone. May the 4th be with you today. So as I wore my t-shirt just for everyone here, so hope you got a kick out of it and enjoy it. So I had a lot of fun putting this presentation together, and I'm really excited to be able to share all of this with you today. And hopefully this will give you some new ideas to make compliance a little more exciting in your organizations. So like you may have guessed, we're going to explore compliance through the lens of the Star Wars franchise today. So any photos you see, anything like that, of course, all the credit to Lucasfilm and Disney. They own the rights to the film. They own the rights to any of the characters, quotes, any of those things that you see. Also, our standard little notification, any compliance advice that we provide during the webinar today shouldn't be misconstrued as legal advice. If you do need legal advice on any of these topics we cover, make sure you seek out a qualified licensed healthcare attorney in your area. So with that being said, let's get rolling. So during our time together today, we're going to explore a variety of different topics, and they're really going to fall under kind of these 6 main categories. The compliance program, how to have an effective compliance program, how to adjust and things to consider adjusting in your compliance strategy, building up and keeping those compliance safeguards in place, artificial intelligence, because of course we can't have a webinar anymore without a discussion on AI, the team approach to a successful compliance program, and then finally learning from our compliance mistakes. And I'm excited for that part, especially there's a lot of lessons learned to be had that make it an even more effective compliance program, learning by those mistakes. So when most people think about a compliance program, usually they are thinking of the hundreds of pages of that lovely legal jargon that doesn't really make sense to most people. Although there is truth to that, let me provide kind of an alternative perspective, if you will. Compliance is really more like a shield, if you will, for your organization. Yeah, there's going to be parts that are kind of difficult to understand and interpret, but all the same, it's there to really protect your program, just like you see on our lovely Gungan shields here. It's really made to protect our organization and keep us compliant. Now, of course, we're going to look at several of the Star Wars characters throughout the 9 films. So here, of course, we have Senator, Chancellor, and later Emperor Palpatine, probably one of the most devious and cunning of the Star Wars adversaries. Really, when we look at his character, he manipulates, he lies, he creates chaos to confuse everyone around him and hide his real agenda, which is ultimately to have power. However, there's two simple words that he utters in Revenge of the Sith that I think are very applicable to compliance, and they're this: do it. It's understandable that each organization has their own unique place in a compliance journey. No two organizations are going to be the same. They're not going to operate the same. They're not even going to organize their compliance programs the same way. And that's good. We want our compliance programs to be unique to our organizations. Now, that being said, yes, compliance can feel very overwhelming. There's no denying that fact. Despite how overwhelming it can feel, it's important that we kind of put aside those feelings of being overwhelmed and focus in on more specific tasks to help us be compliant and help us to follow the guidelines that are in place. So this could be as easy as thinking of one thing to do every day with your compliance program. Maybe that's review a policy. Maybe that's set up a employee suggestions box. It could be starting to draft a policy. It doesn't need to be anything overly complicated, overly long. Just don't hesitate about making sure that you move forward with your compliance program. So it doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to necessarily make sure that it's done completely. Even just getting things started can make a great deal of difference in keeping your compliance program running and keeping it effective. So if it's something that you can reasonably do, then go ahead and just do it and get it started. Now, in today's compliance landscape, it's really no longer plausible to say, I didn't know about this compliance requirement, or some similar sayings when you get audited. There are so many tools, resources, webinars, even AI now that teaches us how to be compliant and the different pieces that we need for being a compliant organization. You almost have to actively ignore compliance information now to escape it. So that makes it even easier than ever for investigators to look at that and claim willful negligence if you have this plethora of resources at your feet that are free and available, but are not being used. So without beating a bantha dead, just do it. Do one thing each day, one simple thing to help your compliance program become more effective. All right. So in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn says, your focus determines your reality. I think this is especially true when it comes to compliance. If compliance is an area of focus in your organization, that really actually permeates throughout everyone in the organization. In healthcare, we kind of have coined the term, I guess, a culture of compliance, if you will. When compliance is really a part of your everyday activities in your organizations, that really gives employees everything they need to apply what they're learning and make it not feel like it's just a bunch of rules and regulations that they have to follow. Compliance really is more of a way to ethically and safely do business. So, quick question for you. Where is your focus at? Is compliance a part of that focus in your organization? Or maybe is today the day that it's time to start making that shift towards having a compliance-focused organization? There could be even just specific areas of compliance, either that you need to focus on more or that you're already focusing on. And if that's the case, great. Then just reframe it and say, okay, what do I need to just adjust a little bit? Or what do I need to put more at the front and center to make sure that this compliance knowledge, compliance information is getting out to those who need to know it in our organization? Now, in the same movie with Qui-Gon's interactions with Watto, the Troidarian merchant, he uses Watto's weakness of gambling on pod racing tournaments to really secure Anakin Skywalker's freedom. Ultimately, that's how Anakin escapes being a slave to Watto. when the pod race ends, and of course Anakin wins, Watto claims that he didn't have a fair bet with Qui-Gon. And then Qui-Gon replies, whenever you gamble, my friend, eventually you lose. Again, very practical example of the risks involved if we don't take compliance seriously. We don't want to be gambling on our compliance program. We can, if we do, we can upset a lot of different things. We could upset the financial stability of our organization, especially if you get audited. Same with the reputation of your organization, interactions with patients. There's a lot of downstream effects if we don't have an effective compliance program running. Now, if compliance is not an area of focus, again, we want to drive that focus and make sure that we are not just willing to just take a chance and hope that it all works out for the best. Taking a chance on compliance is like betting against good odds or against a Jedi who can manipulate the outcome of those odds. So in today's healthcare landscape, no one is actually going to slip through the cracks unnoticed. Before that was possible, but odds now are not ever going to be in your favor of slipping through the cracks. Now, again, if we look at implementing just a few pieces of a compliance program at a time, it's that forward momentum, forward trajectory that's really going to make a big difference. It's not necessarily making one gigantic effort, all the focus one time. It's steady and consistent efforts that really make the biggest difference. I mean, we can even look at our landscape today. Technology has radically changed healthcare, it's radically changed compliance. I mean, we even look now, cyber attacks are occurring on a more regular frequency than I think we could have even predicted, 10 years ago. We're seeing attacks happening multiple times a day, multiple organizations having to shut down because of the intensity of these cyber attacks. And in conjunction with that, of course, we're seeing more involvement from the OCR, especially when it comes to HIPAA incidents, on enforcing actions against organizations that have a cyber attack. So when it comes down to it, don't gamble on what you've got in place. Always be looking for that next step to take to keep your organization compliant. So whatever the reason was or is for not having an effective compliance program, just know, like Watto, eventually our luck's going to run out. All right. So compliance programs were really never meant to be stagnant. Even when we look at the 7 elements of an effective compliance program, the things in there are more like actions that we're going to do, that we're going to take. So as we continue to see new technology rolling out, as we continue to see new regulations roll out, and a new generation of providers coming into the workforce, we are also going to see things happening like we're seeing now with a lot of practices where budgets are getting cut or where AI makes someone's job redundant and there's organizational changes as a result. I mean, we could really have a whole webinar just on the changes in healthcare today. But with all that constant change, and as that constant change continues to happen, we really need to keep our organization up with the times and what's going on around us. And a lot of time that's going to require us to adjust our compliance vision and our compliance strategy. Now, in episode 4, A New Hope, we meet the infamous Obi-Wan Kenobi. When we think about Obi-Wan, he is a character with decades of experience and significant life-altering events. During episode 4, he talks with Han Solo, and Han makes a passing reference to him about being lucky, to which Obi-Wan responds, in my experience, there's no such thing as luck. Well, similar to what we just learned with Watto's gambling experience, luck is not a compliance strategy. So no matter how many lucky socks, lucky rabbit's feet, dice on a chain that we have, eventually that luck's going to run out. So we need to think in terms of strategy with our compliance program rather than, again, just kind of sitting back and hoping for the best. So let's say, for example, that your organization's never had a cyber attack or a hacking incident. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. So if you haven't had a hacking incident or a cyber attack, first count yourself lucky, and then take steps now to prevent that from happening in the future. Make sure that you have the appropriate safeguards in place and really implement a plan that has data behind it proving that it can protect your organization from cyber incidents, or at the very least, mitigate them in some way. This can be done in a lot of different ways. You could hire a vendor, like an IT vendor that could help you with that. You could hire, if you have an internal IT team, it may be introducing additional software or having outside vendors perform something like a penetration test. It really just is about making sure we have a proper focus on these things and have the appropriate safeguards in place, like the HIPAA security rule requires us to have. Now, it's also important that our compliance program can be fluid and changeable. As C3PO says to R2D2, again in A New Hope, I suggest a new strategy, R2, let the Wookiee win. Now, of course, he's referring to Dejarik, which is hollow chess and not compliance. However, changing up our compliance program and our compliance strategy is still sound advice. We may have times where we need to reframe it, kind of like what Albert Einstein said, if insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that our compliance program is evolving with the world around us and evolving within our own practices, culture, and customs. So now when you think about how your compliance program exists right at this very moment, is it working? Is there something in place that you can think of when you think of compliance that you go, oh, geez, I really need to change that, or I need to look at that again? Chances are you probably have a list of them, but easily you'll be able to come up with a couple off the top of your head. If you're going, I'm just not sure, there's a lot of different things that I need to make a change or change my strategy, consider involving your compliance committee to help you evaluate and really determine the priority of the different things that need to be done to strengthen your compliance program. Honestly, your compliance committee is a great resource that I think is often underutilized, because they may notice things in their department that you're not necessarily overseeing in the compliance department because of the different areas you're focusing on. So when you have your compliance committee set up, make sure that you have enough people on your committee from enough different areas of the organization that you can really make sure that you have really, I guess, insight into these different pieces of your organization and potential concerns you may not be aware of. That is going to be extremely helpful for you as you continue to move forward with your compliance program. Now, in our current financial landscape, funding a compliance program is often the target of budget cuts. That's typically the first thing to go. Much of that stems from the idea that, from kind of an outside of compliance perspective, that it can give the appearance of having no tangible value. In a lot of ways, it's almost like car insurance. You pay for it every month. It doesn't really do anything for you until you have an incident or an accident. So trying to frame compliance as more of a risk management strategy for other leaders in the organization can be a difficult task, but it's an important one, because compliance is a risk management strategy. The cost of maintaining a compliance program or having those resources really is minimal and pales in comparison to the amount that you can get fined if you're not compliant and what that would look like. So think about some of the obstacles that you have right now in your compliance program, or even in enacting parts of your compliance program, and consider some different ways you can alter your strategy to make sure you have the necessary resources to protect your organization. Now, in Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, Republic Fleet Commander Poe Dameron is captured by our new nemesis that we meet, that is Darth Vader's grandson, Kylo Ren. When Poe's being interrogated and threatened by Kylo Ren, and quite frankly, initially to no avail, he wittingly responds back to Kylo Ren in kind of a humorous way, saying, you might want to rethink your strategy. The same thing can be said of us in that effective compliance program. Again, kind of like what we talked about, we want to make sure that we are rethinking our compliance program if it's not working the way it's currently set up. Now, training continues to be one of the most effective means, and probably one of the simplest, if I'm honest, to preventing non-compliance. After all, our workforce is not going to know what they don't know. So training gives them the information they need to know to really effectively follow our compliance program, to follow our policies and procedures, even things like simple, almost meaningless compliance tasks can make significant changes in your organization. So we've even seen these changes happen over the last, almost 30 years since HIPAA has been signed into law. Things from moving from in-person training to digital learning management systems to now even the training landscape moving more to short video bursts rather than an hour-long video training. So we kind of have to keep in mind how our compliance program is best learned by our workforce. So a lot of popular training platforms and things like that are moving to more of that kind of 20, 30-minute episode length compliance trainings, because that is the amount of time that either employees have to take training, or that's the amount of time they can keep them engaged in the content. Policies are also another area we have to kind of rethink our technique a little bit. I know a lot of organizations that prefer to have very lengthy policies, but a lot of times those lengthy and complicated policies can cause the reader to lose interest and ultimately miss important information. Plus, that also requires significant amount of research on behalf of your compliance officer or anyone helping them write these policies and even updating them each year. So with AI functionality at our fingertips, that does change things a little bit. It can help alleviate a lot of that heavy lifting of doing the research, but we have to make sure that what it's spitting out and providing back to us is actually accurate information, and that we are not receiving an AI hallucination in the reply we're getting back from our prompt to write a policy. So we always want to make sure that we are careful about how we do that. I always frame, especially when I'm creating a new policy, I always am very specific to say I want it to only to reference .gov sources, because there's a lot of organizations out there that have varying interpretations and opinions on regulation and what that looks like, how it should be done, how it should be interpreted. And AI is going to pull in all of those thoughts and opinions and spit that into your policy. And that could be really detrimental if we're not careful. So at the end of the day, whatever HHS, the OIG, the OCR, OSHA, whomever has written in regulation, that's what's ultimately going to stand. So we want to make sure our policies are considering that before we just blanketly accept what AI generates and provides for us. Oh, safeguards. I could do a whole webinar series just on safeguards alone, and maybe I will. We'll see. There's so much information we can unpack about safeguards. So for today, I'm just going to focus on a couple. But before we dive into that, of course, it's May the 4th, so we need to draw our Star Wars comparison. In episodes 1 through 3, the galaxy, of course, is ruled by the Galactic Republic. The Republic is the form of government that's really responsible for regulating and safeguarding not only intersystem relations, trade, defense, but most importantly, protecting peace between planets and star systems. However, during episode 2, Chancellor Palpatine surreptitiously, again, kind of convinces all the senators and the other government officials to give him emergency power, in essence, to command all of the Republic without having safeguards in place, and leaving his power unchecked. As Senator Padme Amidala famously says in episode 3, so this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. Our organizations can face that same kind of destructive fate as the Republic if we are not doing what we need to do to maintain appropriate safeguards in our compliance program. In essence, safeguards are our own checks and balances to make sure everything's in its proper place and going to be effective in our compliance program. Now, in episode 7, The Force Awakens, Stormtrooper FN2187, later known as Finn, escapes the First Order by rescuing and releasing Commander Poe Dameron of the New Republic. Shocked by Finn's defection, Poe stops him in the middle of their escape attempt and asks, "Why are you helping me?" To which Finn amply replies, "Because it's the right thing to do." As sentimental and lovely as this moment is, it does teach us a very powerful and simple lesson about compliance. And that is simply do the right thing. That is one of the most influential things that we can do, is letting our workforce know we're going to do the ethical thing, we're going to do the right thing. Even if it's the hardest thing, even if it's the harder thing, we're going to do the right thing. And that's how we operate as an organization. When we think about the tools we have in compliance, the workforce is a tool we often forget about, but they are our most valuable and most powerful compliance tools. They're often the ones that are going to hear first about a compliance issue, whether it's something they've observed, whether it's something they've done themselves. However you want to frame that, your workforce has tremendous power and influence in your organization. Creating that kind of speak up culture, or culture of compliance, if you will, encourages your workforce to make that significant impact in helping your organization stay compliant. And honestly, that influence, it starts from the top down. It's going to start with your board, with your executive leadership team, and trickle down. If the employees and workforce sees them taking compliance seriously, they're going to take it as well. It's just one of those innate human things that's built into us to follow a leader or someone in a position of authority, for the most part. So things like implementing an open door policy with the compliance officer or other leaders, and encouraging open dialogue between those leaders and employees is key to really making sure you get the information you need to keep your compliance program effective. Now, part of this is going to be including a code of conduct. Your code of conduct is really your way for your employees to know what behaviors expected of them, including the ethical standards you expect them to uphold as being part of your organization, being employed, even if they're a volunteer or a student, making sure they understand those parts of your organization. This document is really a vital piece that defines your values as an organization and how you want to uphold those values in your organization. They provide the guidelines, I guess we could say, again, the safeguards that we need to make sure that employees know what to do and how to act when an answer doesn't seem, or a situation is not quite so black and white. Your code of conduct really acts like a compass for your organization. It's going to guide your employees to the behavior that you want them to exhibit, which is, of course, ethical decision-making ultimately. So if your organization doesn't have a code of conduct, or it's been more than a year since you last look at it, I would highly recommend making that a priority for your organization's compliance program. Now, although this safeguard is not officially stated in regulation, and I will just reiterate that again, not official, not in regulation, I do think it deserves an honorable mention, which is why I'm including it. We hear this phrase, "I've got a bad feeling about this," from multiple Star Wars characters in the franchise. Luke is the very first one, if we go in time of the movies being published. So we'll attribute it to Luke, but whether it's being pulled into a Death Star or landing in a cave that is actually a ginormous space creature, again, we hear this phrase a lot. But it does teach us a more empirical response to compliance, and that's trust your gut. Since this safeguard is more qualitative instead of quantitative, I can appreciate that it's not actually listed in the regulation, because A qualitative assessment can be much more difficult to enforce and to follow, but it still doesn't make it any less of an effective compliance tool. So if you'll forgive me for a very brief tangent on this topic, a long time ago at a university far, far away, well, I guess really not too far away from here, a couple hundred miles, I was sitting in a psychology class that was teaching us basically how the brain operates. And they boiled it down, my professor boiled it down into two simple main parts. You have two parts to your brain. You have the old brain, also known as the limbic system, and this is where your basic life functions happen. Breathing, balance, your fight or flight response is also stored in the old brain. And then you have the new brain. This is also known as your prefrontal lobe or your prefrontal cortex. And that's where things like logic, reasoning, decision making, planning, all of those things occur. Now, a gut instinct or a bad feeling about something or a situation is really actually your fight or flight response triggering in the old brain. It's one of these ancient things that's built into the chemistry of our brain and how it operates. So this is actually, that gut instinct is actually a biological function to help us sense danger or that something's not right. So if it feels off, if it doesn't feel right, trust your gut, go with it. Worst case scenario, you investigate something that's unsubstantiated or that doesn't really exist, or you investigate a gut instinct and find something that's wrong, and you're able to really mitigate any issues before it gets blown out of proportion. So think of your gut as using the compliance force, if you will. Now, in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, Imperial forces find the hidden rebel base in the Hoth system. They quickly arrive, they try to foil the rebels' escapes, and it ends up basically a disaster. We're having ground assaults, we're having orbit assaults. It continues to be bombarded as the rebels are trying to make their escape and the Empire is trying to crush them. So think of this as how we can prevent Imperial troops from entering our base, if you will, our organization base. There's safeguards we can put in place. First and foremost, and I'm sure you've heard this many, many times, is the security risk analysis. This is a very common topic with compliance webinars, with conferences, things like that. I'm sure you're tired of hearing about it, but it's still one of those biggest areas of compliance program failure. So it continues to be a very important topic that's discussed. Aside from that, it's something the OCR will ask you about if you ever are audited. They'll straight up ask you if you've conducted a security risk analysis and when it was last done. So if you will, as we kind of frame this in Star Wars, think of your security risk analysis as blast doors. In the Star Wars universe, the blast doors are really reinforced beyond regular doors. They're made to keep explosions out. They're meant to keep people safe. They are meant to protect something inside or keep other threats from entering. The SRA is exactly like that. It's meant to keep your data safe. It's meant to make sure that it does not get exposed in a way that it shouldn't. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, there are proposed changes to the HIPAA security rule right now, which no doubt will be reflected in the security risk analysis once they're finalized. The extent to that, we still have yet to know until that rule is finalized. But until then, if you haven't completed an SRA in the last year, I would highly encourage you to do that as soon as possible. As great as the wonderful technology advances are that we have around us right now, those technology advances can be used just as effectively for ill as they are for good. So you're basically giving threat actors additional resources to attack your organization using the same materials, the same tools that are helping us be compliant. So it's very important that we make sure that we do what we need to protect against basically a threat actor that has significant knowledge on their side to attack your organization. The second part of this that I want to talk about is access controls. This is one of the safeguards that is addressed within, should be addressed within your policies as well as in your security risk analysis. And that safeguard really looks at two different ways. It's looking at both your physical safeguard and your technological safeguards. So this is anything that's going to protect your PHI or your EPHI. So physically, those safeguards and that access control might look like keeping track of who has access to your alarm codes, who has keys to the building, who's responsible for making sure doors are locked, windows are locked, the alarm is set. All of those physical barriers to protecting your data, your patient information. And that applies just as much for PHI in a printed form or on paper as it does to your EPHI. We still may have PHI in computers and things like that, but what are you doing to physically prevent others from getting that computer and taking it out of your organization? Laptops get stolen, tablets get stolen, they get misplaced, things like that happen. It's a part of being human. Although we can try as much as we can to put safeguards in place to prevent that from happening, we need to make sure that we have not only those physical safeguards, but also the technological safeguards. So not only do we need to worry about people physically getting into the building, but we also need to consider that from a technological standpoint as well. It's no surprise, cyber attacks are happening all the time. They're happening everywhere. Again, if you haven't had one, don't get too comfortable. The time is coming. It's time to really put those things in place that you need to protect your organization now. We can't rely on hoping that it's not going to happen to our organization. Long time ago, in perhaps galaxies far, far away or just close by, targets were large healthcare organizations. Threat actors went after them because they had the most data. Again, a lot of these technological advances now have kind of changed that a little bit to where threat actors are going after smaller organizations because they're discovering, as a small organization, you don't have the same resources and accessibility to protection that a, multi-hospital system will have. It's just not physically reasonable. It's not financially feasible. So it's important that we still protect our organization in whatever way we can, even if we're just small, even if we have less than 10 employees. We need to try and put those electronic safeguards in place to protect our organization. Oh, Yoda. Okay, I think Yoda is probably one of the most beloved of all the Star Wars characters. With over 900 years of life lessons learned, Master Yoda is indeed a very wise Jedi. And of course, this Yoda quote is going to be no exception. Always passed on what you have learned. I don't do a good Yoda impression, so I'm not even going to torture you with it. So everyone today on this webinar, to some degree, has something in common. We all have some stake in helping our organization remain compliant. Whether we are an employee that has, relatively simple job responsibilities, we can speak up and say things. If we're the compliance officer, we've got a lot more on our plate that we need to be aware of and that we need to handle and address to keep our organization compliant. If my time in compliance has taught me anything, it's that it can't exist in a vacuum. Our compliance programs really are only going to succeed if we have guidance and input from others in our organization. I mean, if you have ever tried to read the HIPAA privacy and security rules from beginning to end, as Master Yoda would say, page turners, they are not. So if you're new to compliance or part of a compliance team, welcome. I hope I haven't scared you off so far in the first half of our webinar. Everyone here all started out on the same playing field at some point. All of us started out not knowing much about compliance, not knowing much about our safeguards, things that we need to do. Over time, we've all learned and we've all adapted and continued to improve our understanding of compliance. Again, this is one of those great ways in which we can pass on what we've learned to make sure that the up and coming employees, new employees, people new to healthcare are empowered with that knowledge of how important a compliance program is and the value that they bring to the table in our organizations to help us stay compliant. So don't underestimate the power of compliance training, whether that's formal or whether that is passing on what you've learned about compliance to those around you. When we look at workforce members new to our organization, we want to encourage them to ask questions about compliance. That's how they're going to learn. Worst comes to worst, if we don't even have the answer ourselves, we can always tell them we don't have the answer, but we can find out. There's always a resource out there you can turn to get guidance on compliance information. Like I said, it can't exist in a vacuum. There are lots of resources out there to help you if you have questions about compliance or your workforce has questions that you are not sure about the answer. So be wise like Yoda, pass on what you've learned, and do what you can to help your organization stay more compliant, because ultimately you don't have anything to lose when it comes to being compliant. Now, taking kind of another look at a different film, which is episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, we see this transition happening with Jedi Master Anakin Skywalker when he shifts from being a Jedi, being on the light side of the Force, to switching to being a Sith apprentice and on the dark side of the Force. Now, in this epic lightsaber battle on the lava planet Mustafar, Anakin Skywalker and his old Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi fight to the death. And before some seriously tear-jerking dialogue to Anakin, Obi-Wan jumps off a hovering droid they're fighting on over this lava, and he lands on a slope of a hill on higher ground. And then he proclaims to Anakin, "It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground." Being on higher ground, of course, puts Obi-Wan at a strategic advantage over Anakin. He would have to leap up and over him in order to gain the advantage. When it comes to compliance, we need to remember that HHS, OSHA, all of these regulatory bodies, they already have the high ground as compared to us. They're the ones that are writing the regulation. They're the ones that are enforcing it. They're the ones that are developing all of these things. And then we need to abide by those things. So as rules changes and things happen in compliance, we need to remember that we're not on even footing. So we need to do what we need to with our compliance program and learning more about our requirements to put us back on even footing. Likely, your team is going to be your best backup for making this happen. Again, your compliance committee should not be overlooked or overshadowed when it comes to making sure your organization has a good vantage on compliance. So as much as rules and regulations can become very burdensome, remember, we don't want to put ourselves at a disadvantage. The safeguards and the regulations that are put in place are there for a very important reason. If we boil compliance down to its very, very essence, all of it stems around one thing, and that's keeping patient information safe. HHS wants that done. We want that done for our patients. We want to respect their privacy. We want to respect their health information, just as we would want ours kept safe and protected. So every one of those regulations, rules, requirements all serve to fulfill that purpose of keeping patient information safe. They are safeguards to help us raise our organizations to a higher way of protecting patient information, sensitive information, and helping us fulfill true ethical obligations to our patients to protect their health information. Now, of course, I don't think any Star Wars and compliance themed webinar could go by, again, without discussing a little more artificial intelligence, mostly because Star Wars is full of artificial intelligence, from computers to droids, robots, and more. But for our purposes today, we're just going to limit it to artificial intelligence that is directly applicable to us. But if you do have a droid, I would love to see it, so please reach out. The AI landscape is changing and adapting, it feels like, every single day. So it's important that as compliance leaders, we're aware of how it's being utilized in our organization. There are an overwhelming number of webinars, conference presentations, white papers on AI. So we are only going to touch on it very briefly for just this bit because there is a lot out there. So in Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, Finn leads Han Solo and Chewbacca and other resistance troops to destroy Starkiller Base. As Finn tries to guide them to the shield generator there, he suggests that the Force will guide them to the generator since he doesn't actually know where it is. And Han implies very emphatically, that's not how the Force works. And some of us may feel very similarly to Han when we talk about using AI in our workplace. It seems like every time there's a new version or new type of AI that comes out, we tend to latch onto it. Employees tend to latch onto it without actually fully understanding how it works and the type of data that it provides or gives. So it's pretty important, but also very straightforward when it comes to compliance and AI. Trust, but verify. AI programs are still prone to misinterpretations. They're still prone to hallucinations. Even the best ones out there are still not without their limitations. So it's important that our workforce understands that we have these limitations in play. We also need to be aware of shadow AI use, where our workforce members are using AI without approval, without authorization, and most importantly, without oversight in our workplace. Picture this scenario, for example. A provider wants to use generative AI to help them summarize patient encounters. They plug all the information that they need to summarize in there. In seconds, they now have a well put together summary of the patient encounter. Well, unless that provider properly de-identifies the data before putting it into the AI, all of that data they just put into the AI is now owned and has rights by that generative AI organization. There's a couple exceptions to that, but for the most part, if they're using a free version especially, it is owned by that AI company. So we do not have any rights really to confidentiality or even client attorney privilege if we put something in a free version of AI by mistake or intentionally. So we want to make sure we avoid that at all costs. Now, you can imagine the logistical nightmare and reputational damage that would happen if an AI vendor had a breach and someone accidentally put PHI in there. That information's now out there. That's going to impact your organization. That's going to impact that patient. There's serious ramifications that come from that. So it's important that we have an AI policy in place that clearly states out what's right, what's wrong, what's acceptable, and what's not acceptable in our organization. Because when it comes down to it, if we see some of the shadow AI use or inappropriate use of AI, we're going to have trouble enforcing that if we don't have it spelled out for our workforce, knowing what our guidelines are, what we're doing to keep our information safe. So think critically about how AI is being utilized in your organization and how you can mitigate risk. All that being said, there are AI platforms out there, generative and other forms, that will sign HIPAA appropriate business associate agreements and provide sufficient protection for your data. If you're going to even consider something that might accidentally have EPHI in it, I would highly recommend making sure that you use a version of AI that will allow you those protections and that signed business associate agreement to ensure, even if there's a simple mistake that happens, that your data is protected and that everyone is held appropriately accountable for any misuse. All right, like I mentioned before, compliance doesn't exist in a vacuum. To make a compliance program effective, we need everyone in our organization to work together towards that. We need everybody's help, from our compliance committee down to every single employee, volunteer, student, intern, anyone. Even if one person is the weak link, that impacts our whole organization. So we want to make sure that we have everything we need in place. Now, as Luke Skywalker says to Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, Search your feelings, Father. You can't do this. I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate. No compliance officer, I believe, really understands, or I guess is naive enough to believe that everyone in their organization loves compliance. Even compliance officers, in many cases, do not like compliance to some degree. In fact, I'm sure we all have employees that we know are accurately haters of compliance. So at the very least, we need to make sure that we change that tune a little bit, that we help everyone understand the purpose of why we have compliance and why we need it, why it's important. So we need those reinforcements. We need managers. We need employees. We need leaders. We need board members. We need them to become compliance champions. And well, I guess really, if they're not champions, at the very least, we don't want them to be compliance adversaries. We'll say that. We want to make sure that everyone understands what the true root of compliance is. Again, protecting patient information is the why behind all of those regulations, those rules, the training, the policies, the procedures, the SRA, all of that is for that purpose, protecting patient information. So make sure everyone knows that why, and that they let go of the hate of compliance, because it's very important, and it's very important for very good reason. And now we arrive at one of the most well-known phrases in the franchise: help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. Now, I'm not sure how many of you probably feel like Princess Leia here, but I know I certainly have at times where you're just like, I just need help. I need help with compliance. Make sure you ask for that help. Teamwork, as corny as it is, teamwork makes the dream work. So we want to make sure that we involve our team. Our team will help us make our compliance program effective. We rely on them to report compliance concerns, to bring things up to their managers. We rely on our compliance committee to show up to the meetings, to participate actively in our compliance committee meetings. Heck, we even rely on HHS to provide guidance for our compliance program so that we can do our very best to protect patient information. So find ways to engage other teams, make compliance enjoyable, which I know is a hard ask, which is why I try to do these fun webinars to give you some good ideas. So, one fun idea. That could be something as simple as going around the office and saying, hey, do you know where our SDS binder is? Great. If the person knows, give them a piece of candy. If not, say, this is where it is. Don't forget for next time. Maybe you still give them a piece of candy. There are so many different ways to make compliance more engaging and to engage your workforce. I will try and keep this my last AI reference for this presentation, but you can get a lot of really great ideas actually out of Gemini or ChatGPT or Perplexity for making compliance more engaging with your workforce. So, like Princess Leia, let's make sure we ask for help from Obi-Wan Kenobi, because we don't want to be our own only hope. All right. Now, as we come to the end of our webinar and start wrapping up, talking about lessons learned from compliance mistakes. Sometimes, despite everything we do, we can encourage people, we can audit, we can train, we can report, we can do whatever is out there in the world to make our compliance program a success. Even if we do all those things, we can still fall short. Like I said, the landscape is always, always changing. We are going to fall short at some point with our compliance program. Hopefully not often, hopefully not the same things over and over again, but we do need to remember mistakes are going to happen. We're all human beings, mistakes happen. It's just the way it goes. We might forget to review policies and procedures. We might forget to update the SDS binder. We wear so many different hats. We're looking at so many different things. Especially if you're in a small organization, this can be especially overwhelming because of all of the to-dos on your list. So one thing that we need to remember is that mistakes will happen, and that how we respond to them is completely up to us. Now, of course, back to episode 4, A New Hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi gets called an old fool by Han Solo, And Obi-Wan quickly quips back saying, "Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him?" With all the resources out there, it's important to make sure that we are not just copying and pasting what someone else is doing. All of our organizations are unique. We're all going to have unique struggles with different areas of compliance. So if you see information out there that is free use, free training from an HR vendor, or free checklists, or certifications that make your organization 100% compliant, remember that we need to put all of those things in perspective. No one is going to be 100% compliant all of the time. If a training is not specific for our organization, it's not going to help our organization be compliant. It's more just spouting out rules and regulations that apply to everyone and not teaching employees how it applies to your organization and applies to them. So making sure that you tailor your compliance program to your organization is a vital part of staying out of trouble. Again, Master Yoda, he says it best. When he comes back to Luke Skywalker in Episode 8, The Last Jedi, he gives some incredibly important advice to Luke. And we can really learn from this, both for successes and failures. So as he and Yoda are having this discussion, they're going over different successes and failures that have happened. And then finally, after Yoda says to pass on what he's learned, he says, the greatest teacher failure is. There we go, cut, end of webinar. Best compliance advice you could ever get. Learn from compliance mistakes. If we had everyone list out their 5 top compliance successes and top 5 failures, I can almost guarantee everyone would know 5 failures before they would know 5 successes. That's because we learn so much more from making mistakes than we do by having success. I mean, we want to get to the point where we're having lots of success, but don't let those mistakes just go to waste. We're not going to ever be 100% compliant. We may for a short moment, but again, we're working with people. We are people. Mistakes are going to happen. It's important that we respond appropriately to those and make them lessons learned for our organization. We never want a good compliance failure to go to waste. So take the time to research it out, discover the root cause of the issue, and find a solution that's going to prevent that issue from happening again. Again, a great time to involve your workforce, involve your compliance committee and other leaders to help make sure we have solid plans in place to mitigate any potential future problems. Failure, again, cannot be overstated for what a tremendous teaching tool it is for our organization and for its success. Well, everyone, I thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I know a little bit harder to join a webinar on a Monday, but I hope you found some things in here that were fun or a new effective way that you learned about compliance or that you can even take back to your workforce to learn about compliance. As we do those things, the compliance force will be with you always. So with that, Josie, do we have any questions that have come in before we wrap up here?
I don't see any questions. If anyone has some, go ahead and put it in the Q&A that we have down there.
Perfect. And if you have compliance questions later on, here's my contact information. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn, email me. I'd love to hear compliance questions, ideas for future webinars, topics that are concerning to you. So we'll leave it open for a couple more minutes for any questions that come through. But other than that, thank you everyone so much, and may the 4th be with you today.